Action without vision is a nightmare. Vision without action is a daydream. So you have to have both working in tandem to be to get to where we were trying to go.
Say that first. He said it so much better than I could have. Actually, Rick said it better than either of us could have.
Correct.
Motivation, the vision without the discipline will never happen. But the discipline without something that motivates us to get there will grow tired and not have meaning. So the give and take of those two things are something that, as John said, a lot of times schools don't recognize the importance of balancing that daily practice with the motivation of want to be for our organization and for our students. And when those two marry together, that's the sweet spot for what a school can be.
Welcome everybody. This podcast is all about you. Why knowledge matters. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Jonathan Vander Els and Joshua Ray to discuss their very newly published book, The Foundation of Change. Welcome, Jonathan Vander Els and Joshua Ray to the show. It's such a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to be here, Yannick. Thank you so very much for having us.
Absolutely. Excited to be here.
To start, who is Jonathan Vander Els and Joshua Ray in one sentence? So each has one single sentence to present himself.
One sentence. Okay, Yannick, I'll start us off. Jonathan Vander Els is a husband, a dad, a son, a brother, a friend, an educator, a veteran, and I'll add a fisherman.
Well, that was a pretty long sentence. I just have to admit. Josh Ray is someone that married way above his status, has two boys, and is always thankful to be part of education and helping other educators.
Before we start into the book, and thank you so much for this introduction, it really gives us some taste of who you truly are. And for the ones who didn't buy the book yet, I really recommend to go on solutiontree.com and really order a copy now of The Foundation of Change. It's really a game changer, and it's so nicely, concisely, and effectively, in my view, edited and written that I truly can recommend it to really anyone who works in schools, or really for himself if he wants to really start living truly a life of meaning and purpose. So let's start. So what made you write the book in the first place? How did this somehow come together, and how did you guys meet?
Well, we'll kind of bounce back and forth here, I think. But the way we met is we're both obviously authors and associates for Solution Tree, and we can't thank the Solution Tree team enough for helping us to make what we wrote concise and have the level of clarity that it did. The team there is just top notch. I was working as an associate prior to knowing Josh, and so I was actually assigned to go support his school in Arkansas. And so I'm a former teacher and assistant principal and special ed coordinator and principal of where I hail from, New Hampshire. So I'm traveling down to Arkansas to work in Josh's school, and Josh is a principal there. And we had an opportunity for 4 years really to work together in support of him and his assistant principal, Faith Short, and their incredible staff. And through that process, we got to know each other, and we become very, very good friends. And it led to a lot of conversations around the need to focus on these very important 4 pillars, which we'll get into, I think, in a little bit. But the impetus for the book really was around the fact that these critical foundational structures are very often skipped in the process of change in schools, and they can't be, because it really does combine the skill and will factors, the culture, the environment, and the mindsets that need to be present for change with the structural components that we know will help support that. And so that really was the genesis, so to speak, for the book. And it developed through us working together and then our friendship.
Yeah, for sure. And I would add to that Yannick, you'll find as our conversation goes on tonight that John is the brains of the operation. John came to work with our school, and we were so excited to have him. But at the same time, when he was coming, the first time we ever spoke on the phone before John and I ever had the chance to meet, we had decided to change our master schedule. We were changing all the structural elements of our school. We were going to upend everything. And we thought, these cultural elements of our school, we'll check this box and just move past it as soon as possible so we can get to the meat and potatoes, if you will, of what we were wanting to do in the change of our school. And honestly, what my learning was as a practitioner, how easy it is to skip past these things, and how many organizations think that the culture will come along as we do the changes. And I was a leader that had to learn somewhat the hard way, that these things, you can either address them initially, you can set them and on the front end and build that strength that you can build on top of that foundation, or you can try to go back and fix them after the fact. And so we learned some of these lessons the hard way in my school, and it became the conversation that John and I realized, how could we approach these things from the perspective of helping other schools to not make some of these same mistakes? Because I think even John would tell you, as a leader, we all want to get to the work of making our school better, and it's really easy to skip past the fluffy nature of the beliefs and behaviors of change, but those are the elements that really underpin everything that happens after that.
And
Josh
I
isn't
find...
giving. Oh, go ahead, Yannick.
No, please jump in, Jonathan Wander. Please go ahead.
I was just going to say Josh doesn't give himself enough credit, or isn't giving himself enough credit, because his kind of intrinsic ability to recognize the importance of culture and to be very intentionally aware of that is second to none.
It's beautiful. It really speaks, obviously, for both of you, and I can really tell there's much more that actually emerged than just a professional friendship. I think that's wonderful. And also, I have to mention that actually, Jonathan Vander Els, he's right now actually doing his PhD, and Joshua Ray, you're done. So you are also an adjunct professor at the University of Arkansas, right? Correct
Yes, sir.
me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
So it's wonderful. So I just want to mention one element, and I think what's usually it's so hard to think about change when it comes to schools and really building those 4 pillars that you are arguing in the book, is also the fact that most people, even in their individual lives, do not have or do not really care about those 4 pillars. Now, this is a huge stress. So if you don't even have it in your personal life, and you will obviously elaborate on the mission, on the vision, on values and goals, imagine how hard it becomes, at an organizational level, especially in a school, which is really a political place, to say the least. So please now jump in and really give us a taste, whereupon the book is really based upon, like the 4 pillars.
All right, so let's start with, we'll just give a quick overview of the 4 pillars. Now, the 4 pillars are a key structure in professional learning communities. And our work with Solution Tree is really based around supporting schools to become professional learning communities, places where teachers are working collaboratively, engaged in action, research, and collective inquiry. And the work that they're doing all goes back to support the students that they're serving. And so with that work as a professional learning community, we know that there are some key structures that will greatly support schools in this change effort, where they're focused on students, they're working together, they're ensuring learning in their school, and they use the day-to-day information that they're collecting to help them monitor whether they're being effective or not. So the four pillars, high-level kind of overview, the mission explains why we exist as a school, and this is an important thing for folks to have clarity on. The very often schools are asked to kind of develop or refine mission statements, and very often they'll get a committee together and they'll wordsmith. They spend their time wordsmithing a statement that sounds very similar to many of the other statements that are out there in schools. What Josh and I really have focused on is, what does that truly mean? What does it represent? How do you know you're living your mission? How do you know that that statement that kind of guides your work on a day-to-day basis is living? So the mission really kind of is that key first point. The vision describes a school that we need to become, right? The school we need to become to make the mission a reality. So how do we achieve our purpose? What are the things we need to do as a school collectively to make that happen? The collective commitments or values are the behaviors that we need to attend to allow us to be successful with our vision and mission. And the goals are ways that we monitor that progress. So I'm going to let Josh kind of talk about the balance of these two pieces, because two are really for now. And Yannick, as you read, two of these components are kind of visionary and for the future. So Josh, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John, for kicking it my way. So I would say one thing that informed the book, and Yannick, you referenced the personal experience for each of us as individuals in light of the organizational experience. One thing that became a foundational component of the book is this give and take between the discipline of who we are versus the motivation of who we want to be, and finding this balance between what's our purpose, as John said, either as an organization or as an individual. How do we practice and live that purpose through our values and through our behaviors? That's an everyday discipline that is not necessarily something that is fun or exciting, but it's the practice of how we live out what we say we are. But there's the recognition that discipline also needs the flame of motivation, right? How can we keep ourselves moving forward instead of just constantly focusing on how we improve? And that vision that John was talking about is something that it's inclusive, it's powerful, and it's motivating, and it makes us, either as individuals or as an organization, recognize the importance of the things that we're doing on a daily basis. And we approach goals almost kind of like the breadcrumb trail between our current reality and either the individuals or the organization that we hope to be. So this balance between the discipline of our everyday and the motivation of what we know we can become is something that we can work to as individuals, but also as organizations, as we make ourselves the individuals and schools that we hope to be.
And what I really appreciate too, you're very specific as well with that. You define it very clearly that it has to have, like, also within the mission and vision, it has to be resilient, it has to be a just cause, and it has to be service oriented. These are really the pillar of a vision, right? And you describe it so nicely in the book. You have to have like a compelling vision, something, as you said, really motivates you, that makes you basically every single day a little bit better by really enacting the change, by embody it, right? And that's the big leap, the big gap between of putting something between what we are now and where we are want to become. So please touch about those three pillars within like the vision and why it is so pivotal.
Yes. So what I would say, Yannick, is that when we think about an organization and we think especially about something that is our North Star or our horizon that we want to move towards, our goal is to think about a vision that is meaningful to every member of the organization, that is going to withstand the changes that we anticipate and even the changes that we can't anticipate, and that is going to constantly move us forward. And so we want to think about a vision from the perspective of what's something that collectively we can aspire to that will hold meaning for the individuals as well as the group, because that's something that will help us. It's the carrot that will keep us going through the discipline of the daily practice of being who we say we are. What do you think, John? You want to add anything to that?
No, it's just like these I would just add, very often in schools, the mission and vision are confused, or they become kind of smushed together, so to speak, and educators in the school don't understand necessarily how they support each other and they're built off of each other. But the vision statement truly does describe, I think is a better way to put it, what that the school really needs to focus on to be successful with achieving their mission. And so oftentimes we'll work in places where, the vision is the mission and the mission is the vision, which is fine, as they have the statements. It's really around the actions that are, exist within the school. If it's working for them and they're meeting the needs of their learners and they're doing the work together in a collaborative way, sometimes they make that they come to that realization. But oftentimes they've developed something and it's sitting on a wall, right? It's their words on a wall when you walk into school, but nobody knows what it is. And part of what we're really trying to reinforce and help folks with is that what really matters is that the mission is something that's part of who they are as a school. The vision as well. It's something that drives their day-to-day work. Students understand it. Parents understand it. And of course, the staff is clear on that. When I work with teachers, when Josh works with teachers, and we ask them what their mission is, sometimes they don't know it verbatim by the words, but you can tell they understand it, right? And that's, to me, what is very important. Like, it's part of who they are and what's driving them to try to be better for their students first and foremost, and for each other. And that's pretty special when that happens.
Yeah, and Yannick, I think I would add to what John was saying. There's you originally asked the question from the personal perspective as well, and I think one thing that John and I tried to make present in the book was there's the need to be disciplined in our work to be who we say we are, but we as human beings also need the aspiration, the goal of what we want to accomplish, and the motivation, the vision without the discipline will never happen. But the discipline without something that motivates us to get there will grow tired and not have meaning. So the give and take of those two things are something that, as John said, a lot of times schools don't recognize the importance of balancing that daily practice with the motivation of what we want to be for our organization and for our students. And when those two marry together, that's the sweet spot for what a school can be.
I'd add in here, Josh, because you're absolutely right. Like this work becomes much easier when you feel it the way that I think Josh and I do, and we hope that others do, right? That it drives you each and every day. There's a quote from one of our great mentors, Dr. Rick DeFore, one of the architects of the PLC at Work process, who's no longer with us, yet his legacy lives on and will continue to live on through all of our work. But he has this quote that I want to share here that really kind of speaks to the relationship of mission and vision. And it's from I believe it's from his last book that he wrote. Action without vision is a nightmare. Vision without action is a daydream. So you have to have both working in tandem to get to where we were trying to go.
Yeah, I should have just let John say that first. He said it so much better than I could have. Actually, Rick said it better than either of us could have.
Correct. Yeah. In praise of American educators, right? So like that just like I said, he had a way of kind of encapsulating what we know to be true in schools, and that's one of the quotes that he has that I appreciate very much.
It's awesome.
And it's also really also making of what is necessary, really make it tangible and real. I think to me, it's like when you're talking about this, it's like reading a book, right? You read the book, but if you don't really decipher it, if you don't really work with it, if you don't really incorporate these great strategy that you were proposing in your book, it's somehow like, just it becomes useless. So but if you just one small step, you start implementing it maybe in a work template, in a worksheet, and you just start really integrating this framework into your day-to-day business, into your day-to-day teaching, it will enhance your practice and everything so incredibly that after a couple of months or a couple of years, you will really see the tangible outcomes. It's just the fact how you organize your thoughts. It's how the fact how you ask question the students, how you respond, how it becomes really livable. You start really truly living it. And so that is really so important. And I love this quote of without the vision, it's really, it becomes, you're just not able to sustain your discipline, right? So now let's go a little bit more specifically to one of the big challenges that you see over and over again, and you really touch and you address it right on in the book. That's really this kind of fear, that usually drives people of not be very open of those kind of ideas that you propose in the book.
Well, I think that this inhibits change to happen the way that anyone is intending. It's a fear of change that maybe it's a fear of somebody kind of being exposed, so to speak, like they believe they're going to be exposed in some way because they don't understand something. So this is where the culture and environment of a school, or just building a culture of learning where people feel safe to take chances and potentially make mistakes, right? We learn from that. That has to be present. And so this is why, we haven't talked about this piece yet, but the importance of what we call a guiding coalition in schools is absolutely critical. One of our great colleagues, Bill Hall, wrote a book called Powerful Guiding Coalitions. And Josh and I and many, many others have certainly taken a lot from that book to help us in our work in developing guiding coalitions in schools. And basically the high level version of this is that change can't happen from one or two people in a school or in any organization. It has to be a distributed leadership model. So teachers and administrators together, learning together, making decisions together, and helping to promote that change together. That's what's effective. There's a lot of research behind this. We know how critically important that is. And what happens through that is that people begin to trust one another more, right? And there are dysfunctions in schools that exist, fear of conflict, absence of trust, all these things that Patrick Lencioni has kind of done a lot of research on and talked about that are very, very real. For people to get through that, they have to build that culture where others own the process. They feel that they're empowered within the process, and so they're willing to start to take chances and work together. That's how it happens, and that's how it's most effective. But if people, again, this is the point I think that we're trying to make in the book, that is, if people ignore this, if they just try to kind of push something through without building that ownership and empowerment of those within the school, then quite honestly, it's destined to potentially, if not fail, it's going to be a very rocky road. So Josh said this earlier: if you don't address it and work at it at the beginning, you're going to have to go back and do that later. There's no doubt.
Yeah. So I love John's last comment. One of the things that we hope to do in the book was to humanize this fear of organizational change. Because I think a lot of times, John and I have both been leaders of schools and organizations. And a lot of times leaders see resistance to change as a character flaw or someone who's unwilling to be their best. When what's so powerful about David Rock's research that we reference in the book is that it's part of the human experience, that these things, that status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness in an organization, those are going to be threats to any single person who is experiencing change. And so how can we, within a school, within any group of people, recognize that part of the human experience is to fear threats to those things? So how do we build support around those things to make sure that people can not only see the change as valuable, but recognize how it will affect them as individuals? And it goes back, Yannick, to some of the things that we've talked about so far. There's this give and take of organization and how we move the whole school forward with a recognition that the whole school is a whole bunch of individual people. And some people might have traditional comforts or strengths or feelings in an organization that a lot of times we don't even recognize are being threatened by certain changes.
This is, I kind of add here, it leads to the importance of values and collective commitments being discussed in schools, because this fear, like, people can try to get through that, but we have to kind of put these sort of guardrails in place to help people be most successful. And we know that, we're both teachers and principals, but principals are very often the ones in the role of trying to kind of, what we'd say, hold the line, right? So we've made decisions, but then some people go and may do what they want. Even though it's against what we've discussed as a school, we know is best for the school. We know we've come to agreement on it. And so collective commitments are where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, that these commitments that we're making to each other about the things we hold dear in our school and that we commit to have to be supported and have to be maintained really by everyone in the system. It's much more effective when a teacher says to another teacher, "Hey, that's not what we do," right? We said we were going to bring these things to our meeting. Now we can't engage in the work the right way. So it's not it's not necessarily a kind of this punitive piece from the principal. It may get to that point, and if it does, the principal certainly has to fill that role and have that responsibility. But what we've seen is when teachers are holding and administrators, everyone's holding each other accountable and holding themselves accountable, that's where the collective commitments really kind of come to life. And the work can progress the way that it needs to support students. And these collective commitments are supporting adults and being able to do the best for their kids and for each other.
Yeah. So Yannick, John and I drew a lot of inspiration from a book called Immunity to Change by Bob Kagan and Lisa Hay. And some of the collective commitment tool that we built was influenced by their work. And one of the things that I think was really powerful in their book was the concept of big assumptions. And if you go back to the fear of change that each of us as individuals, we take the idea that if I was to make this change, it could have this massive impact to me as a professional or as a person. And so one of the things that we advocate as schools are considering the building and the creation of these collective commitments is to empathize and to try to understand the perspective of individuals within the organization that might have big assumptions about how a change could affect them, and to think about collective commitments rather than a massive change to that person, either personally or professionally, to think about it more as a basic behavioral change that's going to happen day by day. What are the small, tiny, as James Clear would say in his book Atomic Habits, what are the grains of sand in the hourglass that we want to change moment by moment, day by day, that will help us become the organization that we say we are? And one of the things in the book that we tried to bring out was, we've talked a little bit about this idea of the mission and vision. The way that we accomplish those two things is that the mission, we become that organization by living out those beliefs day by day. The vision, we reach that goal by taking that breadcrumb trail of goals, that step by step we find ourselves being something that we never were before. And so I think, again, to reference Kagan and Hayes' work, that we've got to try to find a way to remove or to empathize with the emotion of change and to think about the behavioral adjustments that need to happen to move our organization from our current reality to who we want to become.
And I think that's oftentimes what's missing is precisely what you're saying, is that we think like we can make big changes, but unfortunately these are not lasting, right? The small changes, right, in really behavior science is the thing that you can actually maintain, right? Even if it's just 5 minutes, like working out every single day. Well, it's hard to find an excuse, right, for 5 minutes. And I think to point this out, especially at an organizational level, is so valid. And what I really appreciate is also how you combine this alignment with your values based on the mission and the vision, but also then on the behavioral outcomes, right? Which is really tangible. And you may give some examples in the book, how this might play out. And yet it is not easy to actually do, because it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of guts for a leader, for a principal, to really call those things out. Of course, there are different ways how to do it, right? It needs to be done very nuanced. But please dive into a little bit more specifically what you really so beautifully lay out in the book in terms of aligning your behavior really on the mission and how it actually translates into a concrete example.
So, John, if you're okay, I'm going to jump at this first. So, John referenced earlier this concept of a guiding coalition, and the purpose of that is the recognition that no individual leader can have the knowledge or the skill set to meet all the needs of the people that they lead. So, Yannick, I think what I would say to maybe take a first crack at answering your question is that the positional leaders of a school, or I would say any organization, need to recognize there will be things that they don't know are happening, that if they truly want to understand those things are happening, the best thing they can do is to build meaningful trusting, vulnerable relationships with people who have spheres of influence in their organization. And so if we have a guiding coalition that's made up of people that recognize not just the lip service or the beliefs, or as John said earlier, the mission statement, but they know the nitty gritty, these are the things that we're actually doing, then those are the people that can help us say, this is what we're doing in this scenario, in this location, at this time. If we could adjust it this way, we would start moving towards the school that we want to become. And that relationship building is important for the positional leader, but it's a little bit easier when you recognize that if you're surrounding yourself with people of influence, if you're surrounding yourself with people who lead others, your job as a positional leader is to build that relationship first so that you're magnified by the leadership that each of those members of the guiding coalition bring to your team. John, what would you add to that?
I'm going to give like two common scenarios in schools and how the guiding coalition is critically important. So these teacher leaders within the system are critically important to help decisions move forward in a school, to help the work move forward in a school. The first is a common example around decisions that are made and a team of teachers might be meeting and somebody says, why are we doing that? And somebody who might be in the know, right, who might have some sort of a leadership position, may respond in a way, something like, I don't know, they just told us we had to do it. Now, right there, it undermines everything that decision, good, whether as good as it may be, might have, right? The influence that might have because it's been undermined through just that quick statement. When a guiding coalition, if the teachers are understanding, they have to understand there's a skill and will responsibility for their work, and let me explain that a little bit. The skill we refer to as kind of the technical aspects of change, the things that we can check a box on, whereas the will is you used the word earlier, Yannick, and I loved it, the nuanced, the things that they're not as clear cut, but they're so very important. And if we don't attend to that, then we're going to run into issues. So a teacher who understands that they have a responsibility to try to clarify and to do their part in helping people understand a decision that's been made, might respond with, actually, here's why we made this decision. We thought about X, Y, and Z, but we realized that if we did that, then this would happen. So we thought that this would be the best way to approach us as a school. Right there, his or her colleagues are like, oh, okay, there's some thought that went into this. So that guiding coalition member is key. I'm going to give you another example. We all know what the parking lot conversations are, right? So in schools, we have these situations where there might be a staff meeting and everybody nods, and then they leave the staff meeting, they go out to the parking lot, and they're getting in their cars, and somebody might say something like, well, I'm not sure why we're doing that. Like right there, a colleague could say, well, look, you know, we went through a process in there. We developed consensus. We used a fist of five. You should have said something. It's going to squash that, right? So those little types of things that happen in schools are the difference makers. And as a principal, you know, I would hear about some of these things that happen. To Josh's point earlier, you don't hear about everything, and you're not gonna hear about everything. But these little things that you do start to hear, that's the difference maker in the culture of an organization, and allows everyone to kind of know that we're moving in the right direction because people are really holding each other accountable, and it's through those collective commitments.
Yeah, so John mentioned the parking lot conversations. Dr. Anthony Muhammad, in his book Transforming School Culture, talks about the informal organization of schools. And we know from his book, but also from practical experience, that the people that are resistant to change are strongest in the informal settings, right? That's where they have their greatest influence. Positional leaders often are not invited to those informal settings, right? We're in the positions of the more formal conversations. So there are two ways to approach that. First off, we as positional leaders have to make sure that these behaviors that John was referencing, our collective commitments, are present in our formal settings. But if we can build a guiding coalition of people, of individuals who are part of that informal setting that will have the same beliefs, behaviors, and ideals of the leadership going forward, then we have a chance as positional leaders to have influence in places we never would otherwise.
You also mentioned how important goals are, because they are ultimately the kind of what pushes you and what makes it measurable, what makes you accountable to each other to actually fulfill the mission, what your purpose is, in order for you to get closer to your very vision, which is really what draws you, what draws your motivation towards. So explain to us a little bit more about like the goals and how important they are, and why the process is actually more important than the outcome.
I'll start here, Yannick. I think goals and SMART goals in particular aren't new in schools, right? I think what we've found is that too often, though, to get back to like the technical aspects of change, it's a box to check for teachers. I'm going to share kind of a personal example in our school. The first year we were engaged in this process, we knew we should set SMART goals. All of our teams did that, and we checked the box in that, and then we went back to what we were doing. And in May or June at the end of the school year, I was a principal. At this point, I asked, "Hey, how did we do with our SMART goals?" Well, nobody knew what they were, right? So everybody's like, I don't know. We got to look at that. So we learned from that process. We said, okay, we have to try to do better with that. So the next year, we built SMART goals again. We developed SMART goals based upon kind of our current reality, and we started to have these check-ins. And so with these check-ins, teams were constantly engaged in the information. So we use the word data a lot, but the information that they were collecting each and every day and trying to learn from that. Ideally, we want folks to be seeking information, right? So they become so adept at looking at and kind of analyzing kind of all the pieces that are coming in that they start to look for specific components. So over time, our goal process really developed from specifically just proficiency. So how are our kids doing there, to looking at growth alongside proficiency, which is really important because we have kids who are making tremendous amounts of growth, yet they may not fall into that proficient category yet. And then this is really important for teams. We started to develop process goals, and the process goals were for the team. We want to focus on building 4 common formative assessments over the course of our trimester that we develop together, we administer around the same time, and then we analyze together, and it triggers our collective support for our kids. And so that process of developing a SMART goal focused on process really allows teams to try to get better at the work that they're doing each and every day. And we know that that's actually going to lead to the other pieces increasing as well. And so the SMART goal process, although it's super common in schools, we feel like really differentiating that so that it brings in multiple aspects and is helpful for teams is critically important. It doesn't just become another box to check and something that teachers or teams have to do together at the start of the year.
Yeah, so I think John summed it up really well. The thing I would say is in North America, especially as as our government has made major educational changes through No Child Left Behind and Every Student Succeeds Act, that schools are very focused on benchmark assessment data. And one thing that we advocate for in the chapter specifically on goals is what John was just saying, that schools tend to write SMART goals around that data because it's meaningful. It's meaningful from the national level. However, one thing we've learned and that research would suggest is that the state or national assessments, that tends to be the smoke. The flame is what teams are doing, what teacher teams are doing day in and day out. So how do we set goals that are going to provide meaning to teachers and to be, rather than something that, just like John said, is so far out in the future that it loses all meaning? What's something that we can focus on that's meaningful right now in the present, that's going to help us move toward that goal that we have at the end of the year, or maybe at the end of 5 years? And that's a combination of those process goals that John was just saying. What are some of the adult behaviors we want to change? But also, what are some of the pieces in the breadcrumb trail that we as a third grade team or as an Algebra 1 group of teachers want to accomplish unit by unit for our students to ensure that by the end of the year, they can do the things that we know they need to do to be able to be successful.
Yeah, I would add there, Josh. I think the point about the day to day is so important here. And Yannick, I think you kind of referenced that at the beginning with your question. When we ask teachers what gives them the best information about where their kids are, they don't point to the state assessment. Teachers will say the day-to-day interactions that they have, the really minute by minute or second to second even observations that they're making, how students are engaging with material or lessons, how they're engaging with each other, how they're responding to questions that are being asked, how they're asking questions. All of that is part of the assessment. But we tend not to lean on that as much, even though teachers would point to that as the way they know where their kids are. So we try to formalize that a little bit through some of our common assessment practices, but we want to lean into that piece and balance it with these other kind of measures that we use, whether they're district benchmarks or state assessments. Those give us information as well, and we want to use the information that's most timely so that we can support kids when they need it and how they need it. And so that comes from the day-to-day formative practices or common formative assessments that we give every week or two.
Absolutely.
And it's also very important and you mentioned it in the book, that there's no contradiction between state assessments, for example, and day-to-day goals that you're actually cultivating within the school. So they really go hand in hand, and they actually support each other. Because what's usually happens, people always think like there is somehow a contradiction, and they say like, well, we have these kind of tests, we have to make sure that they got to that level, and therefore we don't have time. But you make actually very, very credible argument why that is actually not the case.
I think that we can use the state assessments or whatever that benchmark assessment is. We can use it as quality control for our assessments as a school, right? And so to go back to the example I used earlier of the flame and smoke, if our flame has a different expectation than what the smoke assessment is going to have, then we're going to feel really good all year long, only to be really disappointed at the end of the year. But if we use those goals that focus on that state assessment or whatever that benchmark is to help us define proficiency and what the expectations are for our kids as we're working unit by unit, that helps us to make sure that we're moving toward what that ultimate goal is.
And do you think, generally speaking, like the challenges that school phase? Is it mainly due to the fact that there's just so much more going on? Parents have, fewer time for the kids? Or is it that the requirements have just become, too much to handle, to actually, bring and lift the students up to the level, to at least to a certain benchmark that everyone can be expected to achieve?
So uh, I have seen, and I'm not going to lessen the challenges that are out there for teachers in schools right now. I would never do that. And I would say that doing this work that we're talking about provides a level of support, uh, collaboration, and ultimately an environment for students in which they can succeed. A lot of our conversations with teachers are around controlling the controllables, right? What are the things that are you're able to control in your day to day, and how do we get so good at that our students are going to thrive, and they're going to want to be in school, and they're going to be successful. The mission really should be in schools should be around ensuring learning for every student in that school, and to have high levels of expectation for kids, because that's what they need to go out into the world and be successful in a career, or if they're going to college, whatever it may be. We know that we have to we have to we have the responsibility to do everything in our power to make that the reality for them.
Yeah, Yannick, I would add to what John just said that, when we talk about this PLC process, and exactly when he was saying the mission should be ensuring on grade level learning for every student, I think the problem, or one of the fundamental issues with schools right now, is they have that goal, but they don't recognize that goal as being unfair to teachers if they're not in a culture that allows them to have a team to help them support that. And they don't have the focus of what specifically does that mean for our kids. And so without those two components, if teachers are trying to ensure grade level learning on every single element of the curriculum on their own in isolation, not only is that unsustainable, I think John and I would say that's probably unfair to professional educators. So this process, these ideas that we're talking about, are only possible when we know exactly and have focus and clarity on the handful of things that we want to guarantee for every single kid to be proficient on. But we also have a team full of people to come alongside us to help meet that goal when inevitably we're not enough on our own to do that. And I think without that combination, teachers find themselves up against an insurmountable challenge. Like it's not something that they can accomplish individually, and they're trying to do things that are just impossible, especially following the pandemic, the challenges that kids are struggling with emotionally and mentally. We need a group of people, and we need the focus to know exactly what it is that we want to guarantee for our kids.
And I would just reiterate, less is more. So this is where we have a level of clarity about what students need to know and be able to demonstrate. We have clarity around how we're going to know when students are successful with that. Those are our assessment practices. We have a mindset and the structures that support responding when students haven't learned what they need to learn. So we have to think to ourselves that's not okay. And I solely am not responsible as a teacher to do all of that. We have to have a team in place to provide that level of support. And the structures need to exist for that additional time. If the three of us were going to learn a new skill together, I don't think any of us believes that that we would learn that skill, be successful at it exactly the same time. It just doesn't work like that. but that's how our schools are set up. So we need to provide that additional practice, that additional feedback for kids when it's needed. And also extend learning for students who have already demonstrated mastery. Those are the things that we have to do really, really well as teams. And when we focus on those things and we have the structures in place and the mindsets, which is a lot of what our book is trying to kind of capture, then folks will be more successful in that endeavor.
It's so key. I think this is one of the big challenges, and you know it even better than anyone else. It's the same with research, right? You have to focus it down. And as Ellen Langer really put it so nicely, it's really not, you don't really experience life. You experience, in life on what you focus on, right? And I think, and we also know in happiness research that people are actually focused, they are much more, experience much more contentment, much more, being alive, being in the present, noticing new things, right? And I think that's really so helpful, and therefore this book is truly, truly a gift. So now I just want to touch a little bit on personal aspects on you, because we have talked a lot now about the book. But tell us, each of you, a turning point in your life that really changed the direction of your life and the fact that you are now doing what you're doing.
I'll jump in here first. So it's interesting. I come from a family of educators, Yannick. My grandfather, going back, my grandfather was a teacher and a principal. My dad was a teacher and a principal. My mom was a first grade teacher. I have a sister who is an art teacher. And for some reason, I didn't think I was going to become a teacher. And so I went off to college, and I'll be honest, I struggled. I felt like I was just spinning my wheels. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I ended up joining the military. And so I served in the United States Army, and I was stationed in Washington, D.C., Arlington, Virginia area. I met some incredible people there. I'd say the defining moment for where I am now happened. One of my good friends was volunteering at the school on base. And he asked me if I wanted to join him one day just to go to do some after school activities with the kids on base. And they were about middle school age, most of them. And so I said, yeah, sure. I'll head on over there with you. I wasn't doing anything else. I went over there, and there was some tough kids there. And I found myself going back multiple times a week, anytime I could. I just really enjoyed kind of working with the kids. Like, we did a lot of after school sports stuff, and board games, and just talking. And I remember this one student who, one student at that school had asked me. I was getting ready to go off to the field, which means that we were going to be away for a few weeks. And I had mentioned that to him, and he was disappointed. And he's like, "Well, when are you going to be back? And are you going to come back?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so I started to think, I want to work with kids. So that, my friend who just happened to ask me, and he'd been going down there, really kind of set me on this path to become an educator. And so I ended up getting out of the military, going back to school, coaching, worked as a paraprofessional, worked as a classroom teacher. Kind of all of these steps have been a little different in nature as far as along the way of being an educator, but they all have this common thing, and it's for me to try to help kids. And I don't know that maybe I would have still ended up in this place, but that situation there in on an Army base of all places kind of led me to the path I am on today.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. So Yannick, I'll share two quickly with you. The first, I would say, I was a musician. I was a trumpet player, and was auditioning for all kinds of conservatories across the United States, was playing in a jazz combo and doing all kinds of different things. And my younger brother was in the band. And so I would spend time helping him on his instrument. And I will never forget one night leaving his bedroom, and my dad was standing outside the door listening to the two of us. And he said, I think that's what you were meant to do. And it was kind of that earworm that I never was able to get rid of. And from that point forward, I learned how much joy I got from helping my brother. And then John didn't know I was going to reference this, but when John came into my life, I was a brand new leader. And I was a secondary teacher. I had taught at the 7-12 level, was a band director, had taught music education, and was at the elementary level, and couldn't help but feel like the least qualified person in the entire building to be the leader. And so we applied for a grant to bring in some support to help our school, and John was the answer. And he came to start working with our school. And I look back, there are so many times when I go out and work with other schools and other people that I find myself saying things the way John would, or referencing experiences that I had following his leadership. And so I think one thing that was an undertone for this whole book was our relationship of mentor and mentee, and the growth of leaders, but also the isolation of leaders, and that leading people is something that John and I both have a desire to support other people through. And so because of the success I've had through his mentoring and through his support, it was an honor for me to get to be part of this project.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank
Well,
you
I
so
feel the
much
same
for
way.
sharing. This is just beautiful, and you're really a testimony, of the fact that really life really happens always for us and not to us, and so it's beautiful. Lastly, I want to ask you, what makes you truly feel alive?
So a couple things, Yannick, that I'll reference. First and foremost, my family. Um, I'm blessed to have an incredible wife, Stephanie, who I admire greatly. Just watching how she navigates so many different aspects of her day to day, to me is truly an amazing feat, right? And we have three beautiful children, Grace, Garrett, and Will. And, we talk to a lot of schools about what their why is. Well, that's my why. And what I want for them, I want for all kids. And I think that that's really what drives me. So they make me feel alive every single day. I cherish every moment I have with them. And I feel very fortunate to be able to spend the time I do. And it's a balance that you really have to strive for. Because the other piece that really makes me feel alive is getting to work with schools and watching things click and watching the success happen and watching how good it makes people feel. We know that this is going to be a snowball effect in the sense that, remember, I'm from New Hampshire. I know you lived in Canada, Yannick, so you understand this snow reference, but the snowball effect, it starts to roll. It's just going to build and build and build, and the momentum builds. And when you can see that happen with teachers, there's really nothing like it.
So Yannick, I'm from Arkansas. Snow is like a unicorn for us. We believe it exists. We've just never seen it before. I would say for me it is, I learned somewhat the hard way, that I spent, especially my early life as a man, as a husband, and as a father, living to work. I was very motivated by my job and the desire to do the best that I could. And I've now shifted to working to live. And I have recognized that as much as I enjoy the experiences and the professional joys that come from everything that I get to do, which honestly, on a daily basis, I pinch myself to get to do the things that I do. Nothing makes me happier than playing catch with my sons in the backyard, or, you know, sitting and talking with my wife. And I think that's one of the ways that John and I connected so early on, that we saw in each other this realization that we were people that loved education, loved this process, but that our center and what mattered most to us were those that we loved and the relationships that were most important to us. And I think that drives us both and keeps us from ever getting too far out of our personal sweet spot, I guess.
Thank you so much for sharing and for really being on the show. You're truly a blessing to me and really the world, for the work you're doing and for sharing so openly about what makes you feel alive and really your professional journey. And just big thank you to Jonathan Vander Els and Joshua Ray for being, on the show.
Thank you, Yannick.
Thank you, Yannick. It's been an absolute pleasure. We appreciate it.
Jonathan Vander Els and Dr. Joshua Ray. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.